Nigeria's Third Republic was shorter than the preceding First and Second Republics. It was abruptly cut short on November 17, 1993, when General Sani Abacha, the Minister of Defense, executed a palace coup. His move forced Chief Ernest Shonekan, the head of the interim national government, to resign, effectively pulling the plug on the already faltering Third Republic. Abacha's coup marked yet another interruption in Nigeria's tumultuous journey towards democracy. The collapse of Nigeria's Second Republic on December 31, 1983, following a military coup led by Major General Muhammadu Buhari, led to the suspension of the 1979 constitution. However, Buhari's regime was itself short-lived as his chief of army staff, Major General Ibrahim Babangida, overthrew him on August 27, 1985. Babangida's government subsequently initiated a twin program, economic restructuring, and a political transition aimed at returning Nigeria to civilian rule. In 1985, the Armed Forces Ruling Council (AFRC) established a 17-member political bureau to assess Nigeria's past political failures and recommend a sustainable democratic framework. The Bureau concluded that only 2 political parties should be permitted to ensure ideological instead of ethnic-based political alignments. Consequently, the political landscape was streamlined, with 49 registered associations consolidated into 2 officially recognized parties: the National Republican Convention (NRC) and the Social Democratic Party (SDP). With the political framework set, the next step was to implement a series of measures to stabilize Nigeria's democracy. The objectives included: 1. Enacting laws to prevent individuals from hijacking the political system. 2. Ensuring political parties and election campaigns were state-funded to minimize the influence of private financiers. 3. Establishing institutions such as the Center for Democratic Studies (CDS) and the Mass Mobilization for Social and Economic Recovery (MAMSA) to promote democratic values. 4. Direct AFRC supervision of elections to guarantee a smooth transition from military to civilian rule. And 5. Encouraging mass political participation through grassroots-focused parties. With these structures in place, political activities gained momentum, culminating in gubernatorial and state legislative elections in 1991. The fierce rivalry between the NRC and SDP was evident as both parties vied for dominance. However, internal conflicts and political cynicism cast doubts over the credibility of the electoral process. The presidential primaries were marred by large-scale electoral malpractices. As a result, the primaries held in September 1992 were annulled due to widespread irregularities. The military government postponed the transition timeline, further delaying the restoration of civilian rule. To curb electoral fraud, the National Electoral Commission (NEC) introduced the open ballot system, where voters queued behind their preferred candidate's portrait for a transparent count. While the SDP embraced this innovation, The NRC advocated an open secret ballot system where voting was secret but ballot submission was public. These disagreements led to further modification, culminating in the adoption of Option 4, a system in which each state selected two presidential candidates from both parties who would then face a final vote at their respective national conventions. Between March 27 and 29, 1993, the national conventions were held. The NRC convened in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, where Bashar Tofa emerged as its presidential candidate. Meanwhile, in Jos Plateau State, the SDP selected Moshood Abiola as its flag bearer, narrowly defeating Babagana Kingibe. The orderly and transparent selection process instilled optimism for the main election, reinforcing the credibility of the transition program. To safeguard the integrity of the presidential election, the government promulgated the Presidential Election Basic Constitution and Provision, Decree 13. This decree empowered the NEC to disqualify candidates found guilty of political or legal misconduct. Additionally, Section 54, subsection 1 of the decree allowed for the postponement of elections in case of a security threat. The NEC further reinforced the principles of Decree 27 of 1989, which prohibited political campaigns based on ethnic, religious, or sectional interests to prevent electoral violence. Despite various challenges, the NEC remained steadfast in its commitment to holding the presidential election as scheduled on June 12, 1993, setting the stage for what was meant to be Nigeria's historic return to democracy. However, the events that followed would ultimately derail this carefully laid out transition, plunging Nigeria into yet another period of military dictatorship. The presidential election held on June 12, 1993 remains one of the most defining moments in Nigeria's political history. For the first time, the country witnessed an election widely regarded as peaceful, free, and fair. Citizens turned out in large numbers, eager to cast their votes and shape the future of their nation. The Social Democratic Party (SDP) fielded Moshood Abiola and Babagana Kingibe as its presidential and vice presidential candidates, while the National Republican Convention (NRC) presented Bashar Tofa and Sylvester Ugo. When the votes were tallied, the SDP emerged victorious in 19 states, while the NRC secured 11 states. Despite the orderly conduct of the election and the approval of both national and international observers, confusion arose due to the intervention of the Association for a Better Nigeria (ABN), which sought a court injunction to halt the election, citing alleged malpractices by both parties. This contributed to a lower than expected voter turnout. However, the most shocking development came when the head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida, annulled the election. Addressing the nation on June 23, 1993, Babangida cited several reasons for his decision. 1. Allegations of irregularities overlooked by NEC. 2. Widespread bribery during party primaries and the election itself. And 3. Documented conflicts of interest between the government and the presidential candidates, which he argued compromised their ability to govern impartially. In response, the National Defense and Security Council called for a fresh presidential election to be supervised by the NEC. The annulment of what was considered Nigeria's freest and fairest election sparked national outrage. Protests erupted across the country as citizens condemned the decision. Faced with mounting pressure, General Babangida was forced to step aside. On August 26, 1993, in a move designed to pacify the nation, he handed over power to Chief Ernest Shoneko, who was appointed head of an interim national government (ING). However, this transitional arrangement was short-lived. Just 83 days later, on November 17, 1993, General Sani Abacha orchestrated a palace coup, forcing Shoneko to resign. The following day, Abacha made a national broadcast, formally dissolving the ING and marking the definitive end of Nigeria's Third Republic. Determined to reclaim his electoral mandate, MKO Abiola mobilized his supporters and, on May 15, 1994, formed the National Democratic Coalition (NADECO). The coalition demanded that Abacha relinquish power and allow Abiola to assume office. Abacha responded with ruthless repression. Abiola was arrested for treason, while members of NADECO and other pro-democracy activists were targeted. Prominent figures, including Pa Alfred Rewane and Kudirat Abiola, Abiola's wife, were assassinated in what were widely believed to be politically motivated killings. Kudirat Abiola was gunned down while actively campaigning for her husband's release and his right to the presidency. On June 8, 1998, Abacha died suddenly under mysterious circumstances, prompting celebrations across Nigeria. Many hoped that with Abacha gone, Abiola would finally be free to assume the presidency. However, in a cruel twist of fate, Abiola himself died just 30 days later on July 7, 1998, under similarly suspicious circumstances. With Abacha's demise, Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, Major General Abdisalam Abubakar, was sworn in as the country's 11th head of state on June 9, 1998. His tenure marked the end of military dictatorship and the beginning of another transition to democracy. Nigeria's Third Republic was meant to be a turning point, a definitive break from the cycles of military dictatorship and failed democratic experiments of the past. Yet, despite all the careful planning, constitutional reviews, and political restructuring, it never truly took its first breath. It was a stillbirth republic that existed more in theory than in practice, a vision that never materialized into reality. How could a transition process so meticulously designed collapse so spectacularly? Was it doomed from the start, or was it the product of forces beyond control? The presidential election of June 12, 1993, widely regarded as the freest and fairest in Nigerian history, should have been the crowning achievement of this new democratic order. Instead, it became its undoing. General Babangida's annulment of the election, despite overwhelming domestic and international validation, was the fatal blow. Did the military ever truly intend to relinquish power, or was the entire transition program a grand illusion, a carefully managed theater to placate both the people and the international community? Even the brief experiment with the interim national government under Ernest Shoneko was nothing more than a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Within months, General Sani Abacha seized power, and with that, any remnants of the Third Republic were crushed. The aftermath was brutal. Abacha's iron-fisted rule silenced dissenters, crushed pro-democracy movements, and saw the imprisonment and eventual death of MKO Abiola, the rightful winner of the annulled election. If democracy had indeed knocked at Nigeria's door in 1993, Abacha ensured it was swiftly turned away. So, what lessons can be drawn from this stillborn republic? Was it a case of history repeating itself, or was Nigeria simply not ready for true democracy at the time? And most importantly, has the nation learned enough from the failure to prevent another democratic miscarriage in the future? The Third Republic remains an unfinished chapter in Nigeria's history, a reminder of a moment when the country stood on the cusp of change, only to be pulled back into the abyss of military dictatorship. However, the regime after Abacha's death lasted just 11 months and 20 days when General Abdulsalam Abubakar became just the second military head of state to hand over voluntarily to an elected president, which terminated military rule in the country and the establishment of Nigeria's Fourth Republic with the swearing-in of Olusegun Obasanjo as president and commander-in-chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces on May 29, 1999.